I was telling Tim earlier, I read that the Chinese audience considers Star Wars a wuxia film because you have the older Jedi instructing the younger. Luke has to learn to master his anger and to think rationally and yet still be compassionate. And occasionally he gets to fight somebody with a lightsaber, which is their version of a sword. And so to the Chinese, that whole series really is wuxia. I would say something about Ang Lee, who I interviewed, and that's how you say his name in case anybody was wondering which way it was. I interviewed him the day after this had its North American premiere at the Toronto Film Festival. And he and I, it turned out, in high school, we are 2 weeks apart in age. We'll both be 70 this fall. Thank you. Had seen the same wuxia movie when I was a college freshman, I think he may have been also, called A Touch of Zen. And that had stuck with him and inspired him. And he started to watch wuxia as a kid. I didn't because I couldn't get it. But in the Taiwanese culture, you could. And he talked to me about the history of it and so forth.
Yeah. So we see Jen really struggle to disciple herself to any master in this film. And so talk about his conception and sort of what he was doing that was different from the genre, from the traditional elements of the genre, where he was bending it and elevating it in some ways.
Well, as a general rule, in the wuxia movies, I've seen maybe 8 or 9, and I really like them. I own 6, I think. As a general rule, they're male-centered. You know, the person seeking a disciple or a disciple seeking a master is usually a man. Not always. The heroine of A Touch of Zen, which is the one I mentioned, is a woman who is surrounded by monks who are going to right or wrong. But usually it is a man. And as a rule, the disciple is unruly, but realizes pretty quickly that he, or sometimes she, needs guidance, needs someone who can kind of put some controls on them, who can kind of enlighten them, the way that Luke does with Obi-Wan. And that is the way the genre moves. You get the enlightenment fairly early, and then you move toward it and utilize it and strengthen yourself with it. Here, she never really accepts it until it is too late, at which point, having realized that she ruined 2 lives, she sacrifices herself because she's not worthy now to be a disciple. That's a very unusual... in a wuxia movie, someone may be killed, but they don't commit suicide.
So let's talk about Ang Lee. You had a chance to do a long interview with him. You've followed his career closely. Prior to this, in English language films, folks might be familiar with The Ice Storm from 1997,
right.
Sense and Sensibility from 1994. He worked in Taiwanese films before that, and then he goes on later to do Brokeback Mountain and I'm trying to remember.
Life of Pi.
Life of Pi.
For which he won an Oscar.
Right.
Interesting thing about him, his father was a principal at a school and then a professor, and wanted very much for his son. I said a minute ago, you pronounce his name Ang Lee rather than Ang. It rhymes with Hong Kong. But that actually isn't even his name. His real name is Anh Lee, A-N-H, but he changed it because it had a feminine ending in Chinese. But he failed the entrance exam for college. There's a sort of a unified entrance exam if you're going to go to a prestigious college, and he failed it twice. And he went to what was then thought of by his family as an inferior college, and he couldn't achieve his dad's dream, which was to be a professor. And he ended up studying cultural things, and then he came to the US, and he got his bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, my wife's alma mater. And then he got a master's degree at NYU at the same time as another very famous Lee, Spike Lee. They worked together on Spike Lee's debut film as a student. Lee directed it, Ang Lee was the assistant. Can I talk a little bit about the through line of his movies?
Yeah, I think I would love to, because you see it here, you see it in Ice Storm, you see it in Brokeback Mountain.
All of his movies, possibly because of who he is and his raising, are about the conflicts of duty and the expectations of society and your elders versus the things you feel passionate about doing. I mean, the two guys in Brokeback Mountain are obviously breaking social convention. In this movie, everyone has an idea of what Zhang Ziyi's character should be doing, but she's not interested in any of them. She's just a total id. She doesn't want to answer to anyone or honor any obligations or responsibilities that people try to impose on her. And all of his pushing hands, his earliest film, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, even in Sense and Sensibility, the conflict between daughters and mothers. Mothers have expectations, daughters have lives that are independent, or they would like them to be. And this is something that has followed him through every film he made, almost. And he has said, well, not Hulk, I guess, but more, it is in there a little bit. I mean, Bruce Banner does sort of have to answer to other people, but his view of the world is everybody is torn between what they want and what not just people expect of them, like high achievements, but the roles people want to impose on them. And he said in the interview, that came right out of my childhood. My parents, especially my father, were not satisfied and they were disappointed with me. And they're satisfied now that I make a living and I'm doing well, but they have always felt that on some level I have let the family down. And that's a concern for him almost all the time. He is, I think, I'd have to really think about this, but of living directors, he might have the highest batting average for me of films that are worth seeing versus films that are not. There are only 2 or 3 where I think I wouldn't send somebody to this, and there are almost a dozen that I would.
We talked a little bit, just sort of briefly about he's spent a few years in the wilderness here since Life of Pi. What is he working on? What does he have kind of in production now?
Well, ever since Life of Pi, which is a terrific film, and which interestingly is coming to the Blumenthal in a live stage adaptation. I can't wait to see how they do it. Puppets, mainly giant puppets, I think. Since Life of Pi, he made a movie called Gemini Man, in which Will Smith is being assassinated by a younger cloned version of himself. Who knows why? And a movie called Billy Lynn's Halftime Walk, Long Halftime Walk, which is adapted from a pretty interesting novel about a serviceman. But he decided, and he later said in an interview just this year, that this was his big mistake, because both of those flopped. He became very technologically oriented. And he shot them, instead of the normal 24 frames per second, which is what we see here that sort of deceives the eye into thinking it sees motion, he shot them at 120 frames per second. And they took on this extremely weird, glossy, to me disturbing look, almost like you're watching like some kind of a sporting event maybe, and audiences absolutely hated it. And both of those films went into the tank, whatever the quality of them may have been. And he has now renounced this technology and said, I just want to make a 2D, old-fashioned, shoot it the normal way film. And he's apparently working on 2 projects, and I don't ever know. You hear like, oh, I'm gonna do this. And I remember at one point when Will Ferrell was shooting the film here about the NASCAR racer, Talladega Nights. Oh, I banished it from memory. Okay, well, thank you. I said to him, we'll have Will Ferrell stories another day. When I was interviewing him, I said, you have 14 projects listed on the Internet Movie Database for yourself. And he said, oh, you know how that happens? Somebody says to me, Will, you want to do a movie about, Tarzan's illegitimate son? And I go, oh, I wonder. And then somebody runs and posts that and puts my name on it. So I don't know how real these posts are, frankly. One of them is he wants to make, let me see if I can get that. I want to get the title right. Hang on. That's why old people have notes. He wants to make The Thriller in Manila, about the third Ali-Frazier fight, which took place in the Philippine Islands, which took place when he was in high school, and he didn't go there, and he's never been to the Philippine Islands. So what the fascination of a boxing movie is, I don't have the first idea.
It's one of the great fights of all time.
Oh yeah.
There's a great book written about it by Mark Cram called The Ghost of Manila. So.
And absolutely, as a subject, it's darned interesting. Just the way that When We Were Kings was an amazing story about Ali and Zaire with Foreman. But I don't get what Ang Lee is doing with this. Anyway, it could happen. And even stranger perhaps, Peter Morgan, who was an Oscar nominee for The Queen and for Frost Nixon, is writing the screenplay. What an upper-class Brit and Ang Lee know about boxing, I cannot say. The other film that Lee is allegedly going to direct, with a script by Dan Futterman, who wrote Capote and Foxcatcher, it doesn't have a title exactly, it's just basically a life of Bruce Lee. I guess he worked with Spike Lee, now he wants to do Bruce Lee. And he's decided his son can play Bruce Lee, his son Mason. So Ang and Mason will be directing a biopic about Bruce Lee. It's funny, once we got to talking in the interview, I said to him, did you watch Bruce Lee movies growing up? Because they're very different from this, but there's a lot of martial arts in them. And he laughed and he said, Chopsaki, which is his nickname and others, for those kind of no plot movies where Bruce Lee comes in and goes, you killed my brother, and you're just ready to go. There's no story or anything. And he said, I'm sort of fascinated with Bruce Lee, not his movies. So even back then, it was just an idle thought that he mentioned. So now apparently he's more serious about it.
So when you and I were going back and forth on this, and all, I managed to get the critic riled up here a little bit because I see a through line between The Matrix, which was 1999, and this movie, both of which were choreographed by
Yuen Woo-ping.
Yuen Woo-ping. And then carrying forward to the Tarantino's Kill Bill movies, and eventually land on the John Wick movies. And the John Wick movies have done a little bit of a head nod to the wuxia genre, and by doing a couple of Easter eggs in there. But I got him riled up by suggesting that there might be a through line between them, and he does not think so. So.
I've decided you're absolutely right, so let's move on. No, that was a joke. As a college professor once put on a paper of mine, brilliantly argued yet completely wrong.
This is why I'm here.
I got a D on that. It was not a good paper. The thing about wuxia is it has a very strict structure, and one of the things he's mentioning is in John Wick 4, which if I'm ever sent to hell, there will be plenty of time to watch, has one of the great wuxia stars, Donnie Yen. Iron Monkey is a terrific movie from 1993. Quentin Tarantino and I both really rate that high. But putting him in your movie and having a radio station in your movie whose call letters are WUXIA, even though in fact all radio station call letters are 4 letters, that doesn't make you wuxia. Wuxia requires an adherence to a code. To me, this is like if you made a movie and on the soundtrack it had opera arias, but it was set in New York City about 3 guys who slept under a bridge, and then you went, I made an opera. It had opera music in it. It ain't an opera. And unless you really follow the wuxia structure, and the structure that is imposed somewhat rigidly by the genre, which he does follow, as well as gently subverting it, it just isn't wuxia. It's wonderful martial arts action. I do have to say I like the first John Wick. I just didn't need more of them. And so John Wick 4 might be great. I haven't seen it. But the martial arts in them are terrific. And Yuen Woo-ping worked on Kill Bill. But in Kill Bill, is there any code? Is there any learning? Is there any discipleship? Is there any spiritual progression? Is there any abnegation of violence? No, not at all. There's a delight in it.
Of revenge.
Yeah. I mean, if your entire movie consists of butt kicking, it has its own chopsaki. it doesn't actually become a wuxia movie unless you include the spiritual and moral aspects, I would say.
All right, so I'll take my D on that.
No,
I'll slink away.
I fought for a D+ on my paper.
Well, so look, this was clearly a career apex, certainly for Michelle Yeoh until last year, until everything everywhere all at once, and arguably for Amelie as well. The rest of the cast, maybe not so much.
Well, Ji Zhang had a little vogue from about 2000 to 2005. If you saw Memoirs of a Geisha, she was the lead in that. A really interesting film, I thought. Chow Yun-fat was already 45 or 6 when he made this, and his career had sort of peaked with the John Woo movies, The Killers and Hard Boiled. And after this, he never quite caught on in the US. He made a movie called Replacement Killers with Sean William Scott, and then sort of faded from view. Michelle Yeoh continued to work more in Asia, but occasionally in the US. She does an enormous amount of voiceover now, a tremendous amount of that. Everything from Kung Fu Panda to martial arts films. And I think probably the busiest person in this is the woman who played Jade Fox. Never stopped working. Chang Pei Pei, she had made like 40 films before this and countless films since it. And she was the only person in the film who did not have to be trained in the martial arts.
Oh, she already knew.
She already knew exactly what to do, had worked with Wen Wuoping, but Michelle Yeoh had to learn them. Chow Yun-fat not only had to learn them, but neither of the two of them spoke Mandarin. And so they had to learn to speak the language of the film. Ji Zhang did speak Mandarin, but did not know anything about martial arts. She learned everything you saw before the filming. And there was a tremendous curve of preparation. I didn't realize this until I reread the notes I'd taken from my interview. Michelle Yeoh actually cracked a knee during the film, spent a month holding up production, you can't shoot around her, and then when she came back, told Ping, you need to have me fight more in a stationary way. So there are scenes in this where she doesn't move as much as Zhang, and it's because her knee was still an issue for her. I would talk for just a second about, for me, the nature of the making of the film. Does anybody here remember a movie called The Patriot that Mel Gibson shot not too far from here? This movie cost $17 million, which in its day was amazingly cheap because he worked with Chinese crews. Mel Gibson was paid $15 million. Not his film, Mel. So Mel Gibson plus $2 million equals this. I leave it to you to weigh the relative merits of those two facts. He says, now I wasn't there, but in the interview he said to me, I shot for 8 weeks without a full day off. 7 days a week. Once in a while, weather would stop them a little. Once he said they got lost in the Gobi Desert for about 12 hours and couldn't find the location. And finally, a guide who lived in the Gobi saw them and went, aren't you supposed to be over here? And I took them where they were supposed to be. And I said, wait, go back to the 8 weeks without a day off. How is that possible? And he said, Chinese crews don't work the way American crews do. With American crews, they have a very rigid shooting schedule. They work for you if you're a complete idiot. They don't care. They're getting paid and they're doing their job. And at 6 o'clock, if that's when the shoot ends, they're going home. Chinese crews will only work for you if they like you. And you have to schmooze them all the time. And you have to go up to the assistant cameraman and go, how's your kid? He was having, an operation, I hear. Oh, he's better. And if you do that, he said, they will work ridiculous hours. They don't worry about, oh gosh, it's Sunday. They're just out there doing their thing. And he said, there were 300 people on the crew, and almost none of them ever complained. They thought this was an amazing piece of work. They really liked him. They liked Ping, they liked Peter Powell, the cinematographer, who won an Oscar, well deserved. And they just worked until somebody told him to stop. And he said, I was astonished because I'd made Sense and Sensibility and Ice Storm and Ride with the Devil, which I think is a little bit underrated Civil War movie. And American crews come and tell you what they're gonna do. Chinese crews, you just tell them what they're gonna do. And if you go, I need 200 extras at 7 o'clock in the morning on horses, and they're gonna sit out in the Gobi sun for 3 hours while I set up this shot, they'll do it and they will not complain. Then he went back to making films in America, and I bet they did complain. But he said it was an amazing, slightly frustrating and weird experience. But he was astonished at how cooperative they all were.
There's a nice nod to the schmoozing when Shen-Lu comes back to headquarters for the last section of the movie, and she asks the guy whether his wife's had the baby or not, and he says, yeah, it was a girl.
Okay, and so now he'll continue to work for her for 6 more months. Exactly. I think that's how it operates, and he liked it, but he also said, I got so sick of being on the set every single day that really even I didn't want to work like that after a while, so I don't expect he'll ever repeat that.
So look, we want to open this up to your questions if folks have any thoughts, questions about the movie. Obviously, Larry's got years of experience with this film and the genre in general. So
I'll tell one more quick story.
Yeah.
So I told Tim this, and I forgot to tell it to you. So I'm at the Toronto Film Festival, where the Observer used to send me once a year for a week. And what I would do is go to movies, and if I saw 5 movies a day, which was my standard, I would find one, and I thought, okay, I'd like to interview this filmmaker, and I would go to the studio headquarters at Sony or Universal, and I'd say, can I have an interview with this person? And I ran out of the screening of this so that no one would get there before I would. And I'm going down the street on my stumpy legs, getting over to where the Sony Classics, or just Sony at that point, studio heads were, and I run in, and I go, I've just seen my favorite movie of the year. Oh, I would love to interview Ang Lee, and please, I don't care any time of day. You know, the woman who's a secretary says very kind of somberly, he's a very busy person. And I said, okay, well, here's the thing. I work for a newspaper in North Carolina, but it's also part of a national chain, so the story I write will go to 35 newspapers around the United States. Doesn't make a dent. And she goes, well, as I say,
I'll take your name.
He's quite busy. And behind me, a voice says, I'm not that busy. I turn around, and Ang Lee is standing there. And I said, oh, no? And he said, no, to talk to someone who loved this film, I'd love to talk to you. When do you want to do it? It's like, tomorrow? And he said, sure, I'm not too busy tomorrow. She'll make an appointment for you. And I turn around, and the woman's going, oh, I see, 2 o'clock is an excellent time for Mr. Lee. And I thought, wait a minute, it was an excellent time 10 minutes ago, too. Come on. So what they do when you have interviews, they do 20-minute interviews, and they'll give 20 minutes to the stupidest person in the Western Hemisphere. They don't care if you haven't prepared, if you know nothing about your job. And then sort of like if you had somebody call you on a bad date, right? You have a friend who calls you an hour in, and you go, wait, what's that? My cat had a heart attack. Oh my God, I'm really sorry. I've got to go. I've been having a great time with you. I gotta go. And then you get out of the date that way by having somebody bail you out. Someone comes in after 20 minutes because they don't know if you're a nitwit or somebody who's competent. And they go, Mr. Lee, your next appointment is waiting. And he went, and I said, oh, no, if you have to go, that's fine. He said, no, I don't have to go anywhere. That man comes in after 20 minutes to rescue me if you're not competent. And I thought, I always believed that now, so I would have said it. The guy comes, it's like a sleep alarm. The guy comes in 10 minutes later. And he goes, no, we're good. Same guy, goes back out again. Finally, I asked all the questions I had. It took about 43 or 4 minutes, so we're just one-on-one. And then I said, I'm sorry, I'm out of questions, because I thought I would have 20 minutes. And he said, no, it's been great. And then we just went out in the hall, and off he went. So one of the nicest and most patient people as well as, I'm thinking, one of the most talented directors around. So, although I really don't need to see a sequel to Hulk. Okay, I thought somebody had a hand up, I believe, toward the back, yes? Or just scratching? Yes?
So you've seen a lot of movies, and you said this is in your top 20. So what about this movie puts it into your top 20?
My wife told me to say that. No, it's in her top 5. You know, it's funny, I've seen about maybe 8,000 movies. So my top 20 is, the top few, yes, always the same. And the others all sort of shift. There are 3 things that I think put this truly up at the very top for me. One was, I'm a very skeptical, cranky, fact-based human. And so, in a movie like this, ordinarily I would go, oh, come on, she ran up the side of a building, that's stupid. But somehow I never did. And the magic of it worked for me from the absolute first moment that I think it's in the courtyard where someone is running. And I just went, yeah. And I have to ask, I said to Ang Lee, do you think American audiences will have problems with people running up the sides of buildings and like jumping from roof to roof? And he said, I don't know, do they have problems with Spider-Man? A legitimate question, because I've had people complain and go, this movie is not realistic. Oh, but Superman, on the other hand, is extremely fact-based. So that's the first thing. The magic absolutely works for me at every moment, and that's really, really, really rare. Second thing is, the greatest romances, as you know, are romances where nobody makes it, where they don't get it, right? Gone with the Wind, Titanic, Romeo and Juliet. I can give you a dozen really beautiful, famous love stories that all end up with somebody dying, or multiple people dying, or a failure to compensate for the other shortcomings that have kept you apart. You never get past the barriers. Lee Mubai does say, I love you, and then dies. But it's a movie about fate affecting us in ways beyond our abilities, no matter what kind of good people we are, no matter how spiritual we are. And that's always a very touching story to me. Romeo and Juliet isn't Shakespeare's best play, but it's the one that at every time I see it in any form has me tearing up. So that's the second thing, the inevitability and the crushing weight of tragedy. The third thing is, I like movies that take me away from my own life. And I don't mean escapist movies, like, you know, silly comedies are fine, but they take me out of my daily problems that afternoon. But that truly show me another world that I not only haven't ever visited, but can't imagine myself being in. Big fan of Star Wars for that reason. I'm so old, I reviewed the first Star Wars in 1977. I remember telling people, it's a really amazing film, but you should rush to theaters to see it because it'll be gone in 2 weeks. Science fiction at that time failed all the time. How did I know? Anyway, that's a universe I'll never know or visit, and to be put in it and to believe in it is the perfect escapism to me, the kind I really, really love. And those are the 3 reasons, on top of gorgeous cinematography, very subtle but interesting acting, wonderful martial arts sequences, including my favorite one, which is in the restaurant where she kicks everybody around while barely breaking a smile. It has, to me, it succeeds as romance, as drama, as action, as there's little bits of comedy. And here's the thing I like best. No one in it really is a villain. A villain. Zhang Ziyi is out of control. Her character as Jen is not to be trusted or relied on. But even Jade Fox has a reason for what she does. She's not Iago, she's not malevolent. She was trying to be what Jen became. But because she's illiterate and is held back and is cheated by this child who used her for 10 years, and because the head of the order with whom she was studying, Lee's master, slept with her, I guess consensually, and then told her he couldn't teach her because she was a woman, her rage is founded in something. She's not just running around pissed off and mean. She has motivation, and you can see that given other circumstances, she could have been a good person, a person who had a reason to continue to go on. In fact, she was that with Jen until she realized that Jen had deceived her. So I like a film where nobody is truly just a baddie. And this film has no baddies. And that to me, psychologically, is really interesting. I apologize, that was a very long-winded reason. Anybody else like to ask?
Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Why do you think that this movie in particular, at the time that it came out, why do you think that it captivated Western audiences more so than maybe some of the other movies in the genre or of the time, I guess?
I think there were a couple factors. One, it played film festivals, which movies of this type don't always, or didn't back then, certainly 25 years ago. And it came with a big roll of, oh, you must see this, and critics in Europe loved it, critics in America, including this one, loved it, and everybody should go. So it started with a buzz that was helped by a slow rollout. It was immediately touted as an Oscar favorite for foreign film. It was touted as incredibly beautiful visually. And so it came with a big buzz. That's the first reason. The second is novelty. Some wonderful, beautiful films by other noted Chinese directors, Zhang Yimou and Chen Kai-jie, even Wong Kar-wai, a Hong Kong director, came out after this, and I think they're terrific. House of Flying Daggers and Hero. But you can only, the bloom can only be on the rose once. And there's an enormous novelty to this. It was something people had never seen in 2000. It had no comparison. And people would go, you gotta go see this. It's like nothing you ever saw, which is a draw. And so the critical buzz and the audience buzz and the novelty made it something that could not be replicated. When House of Flying Daggers and Hero came along 2 years later, they were really good, but people went, oh yeah, that's that thing I saw in Crouching Tiger. And so it couldn't catch on that way. This was the highest grossing Chinese film in the world of all time when it came out. And it may have been the highest grossing foreign language film in movie history when it came out. It grossed $129 million worldwide, which was unthinkable for a foreign language film back then. And it set a mark. But you can't do that twice, however good it is.
And I think you can't underestimate how iconic the fight in the bamboo, in the bamboo trees.
Oh man,
that is the swaying and it was such an imprint and was something you'd sort of never seen before.
He doesn't strike her; he just gently kind of repels her, and she can't stop him. And how could you compare that to anything? There's no other movie I can think of that's like that. Except something my brother Russell and I made in our backyard, but nobody ever saw that.
On that note, all right, thank you all. We enjoyed doing this. 2 weeks from now, we're back, the 28th.
You are.
With Shelter Island, right?
Right, we're back to Shutter Island. You'll get to hear me argue that it's better than any of Martin Scorsese's gangster films.
Oh.
So feel free to bring rotten vegetables if that is something you feel strongly about.
Good fellows fans, prepare your ammunition.
That's right.
All right, thank you all.
See ya.